So the first topic on cyber advocacy is more on the page that, in some cases, what we also see in the CERT LV, cybersecurity is just a formality on the paper rather than a priority in the organization. So unfortunately, cybersecurity professionals just don't have to be professionals in their own sphere, but also have to be advocates for security in general and have to lobby in that security into the CEOs. And so that's part of their strategy and part of their risk management. So more all about that will be our next speaker, the security awareness and communication expert from Switch, Cornelia Puze. And with warm welcome and applause, I'd like to invite her on the stage. Please, the stage is all yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Dana, for that very kind introduction. Let me just put my storybook down where it says Cyber Story. So, difficult to see you. I will start off, as people are still coming in, with a little story. I was just getting coffee, and then this guy walks up to me and said, "Oh, hi, who are you?" In Latvian, and I said, "Sorry, I speak English, no Latvian." And he said, "Oh, so your name is Cornelia, where are you from?" I said, "I'm from SwitchCert in Switzerland," and he recognized the lanyard, and he said, "Oh, so you're a speaker?" And I said, "Yes, I am." "So what's your topic?" And I said, "Advocacy." And he looked at me blankly and kind of said, "Okay, in which way? So what are you advocating for?" And I said, "Well, I kind of advocate for more advocacy as part of cybersecurity practices." And he looked at me blankly and kind of thought, "Okay, but what do you mean by that?" And I say, "Well, I think we haven't been so good in telling the story of why cybersecurity matters to people within organizations, but also in the wider society." And then he looked at me and he said, "That's a noble cause. I wish you good luck with it." I don't think he's in the audience here, so I'm not quite sure what he meant by that. As in, you know, the ambition of selling cybersecurity to people and convincing them, winning their hearts and minds, or whether, you know, it was more about good luck with your talk. So let's talk about advocacy and ways that have been established to persuade people. I will use a lot of stories once I get the introductions out of the way. So as I mentioned before, I'm from Switzerland, from SwitchCert. We are the National Research and Education Network for Switzerland. We're also the registry for Switzerland for .ch and .li, and we have a national cert, one of the two national certs, and I'm part of that security team, but I work in human-centered security. So, let's talk about advocacy. Just out of curiosity, because I always like to get a bit of an idea of who I'm talking to. First of all, show your hands if you've traveled from outside of Latvia. Okay, yeah, interesting. Hands for people who are experts or work in communications, in marketing, those kind of subjects. We have one person, two, maybe, okay, three, okay. I'm sorry to say this talk is probably not for you. It's fairly entry level. I'm sure you might take away a few things, but you're probably not the target group. So I know technical people sometimes aren't very comfortable with the raising hands and being interactive. So you can just give me a nod. Am I correct in assuming most of you have a technical background, technical training, IT people, IT security people? Yeah, I see a lot of nodding. Okay, good. So, has anyone ever heard of the term cybersecurity advocacy before? Okay, that's interesting. I haven't heard it that much either. There is a research paper on it by someone amazing, a human-centered security researcher called Julie Haney from NIST. All her work is really good. Check it out. And increasingly, I've seen people referring to themselves as cybersecurity advocates. And I will tell you a little story about one of them. Do you know? Does anyone know Mikko Hyppönen, the Finnish? No? Yeah. Yeah. Have you seen one of his talks? Have you heard him? Have you experienced him? The way he talks about security? Yeah. What do you think? Amazing, right? And he, I would say he's a really great advocate for cybersecurity. So he's a very technical guy, but he's become very sort of people-focused, and he goes around and he describes his job as mainly talking to people, board members very often, or at conferences that aren't necessarily about cybersecurity, but where he explains what is cybersecurity and why is it such a big threat that is really relevant to every single one of us, privately, but also as part of an organization. All right, let's go back to advocacy. What do I actually mean by that? Well, you could say, maybe you think of people shouting into megaphones, saying stuff like, break free from plastic, we don't want plastic anymore. Yes, that could be the case. Or free this country, or stop the occupation of that country. That's a part of advocacy. That's kind of an important part that is very visible on the street. But a lot of advocacy, and especially if you are interested in this field, check out the Break Free from Plastic advocacy campaigns that have been running for quite a long time in the background. And they've been very successful because they have elaborate networks, and in the end, we now have regulations, right, in the EU on single-use plastic, all the rest of it. It's basically because different people came together, lobbied or advocated for less plastic, and they have created a movement. So again, advocacy, I would just call it, well, what many of you are doing, probably not so consciously, but you're the act of supporting your cause, which is, of course, cybersecurity, right? So every time you go and say, hey, we need more security budget because this is really important, we need to defend ourselves, or every time you go and try to convince users to have secure passwords, right? You're communicating, you're advocating for the cause of cybersecurity. And now I want to ask you, do you think when you talk to your different stakeholders, how many of you have to fight for more budgets, more security budgets? Yeah, yeah, a lot of you, right? So think of a situation when you talk to people and you talk about cybersecurity. Are you winning their hearts and minds? That's an honest answer? Okay, right. Well, then you're here I think you're here in the right talk, because I will just walk you very quickly through very basic concepts that I think will help you a lot. So I will be talking about what is targeted communications, like in a very simple way, what are the main things that you have to think about, and I will talk a lot about stories, because stories are great. And this is when I will choose a story and see which one it is. I like doing this because I have so many stories. This is the story about John. Sorry, no, it's not John, it's Joe. Okay, are you ready for the story of Joe? Joe had spent years as a CISO in banking with a large team, everything banking, right, strict compliance, the secure sector. But then he decided it was time to make a career move. He wanted something different, so he moved to university. Anyone here as a CISO for a university? No? Well, it's a very different culture, and everything was different. And so beforehand he had a large team, and now his team was 1.5 people. And the organization is very complex, very big, and regulation suddenly wasn't that important anymore, but everything, like the culture, the value, was about academic freedom. And of course, budgets were very tight. And so Joe thought, okay, so I can't, walk around with a compliance thing. What do I do? And so he decided to talk to his important stakeholders. So he talked to many people staff and faculty, asking them about their work, asking them many questions, asking them about their challenges and what security meant to them. He ditched the jargon, so there wasn't any technical jargon, and he talked a lot about breaches. He told the stories of what had happened to other universities, what had happened to a researcher when they lost all their research, and all the rest of it. And he had a great system, a framework of questions, which he used to talk to the people in charge in a non-technical term, to say, okay, look, this is our protection level, and we stand here, this is yellow, this is green, this is red, and this is how we should invest, or you could invest, to have better protection against the security risks. So, okay, you might think, okay, this is a bit unusual. I would have basically written policies. I would have concentrated on that. Why did he spend so much time going for lunch, going to coffee, walking around campus, talking to everyone? Isn't that a waste of time? And I would say no, because he built all these relationships. In the end, he has this great network of people where he really is close to people, where he understands what they need, and these people support him because suddenly they understand how cybersecurity or security is actually also about research. In this context, because it's a university, it's also about research integrity because they don't want their research data leaked, the data that is critical, of course. So, and in the end, and this is the lovely end of this success story, Joe, not John, within 2 years, he managed to actually grow his team from 1.5 to 5 people. So he tripled it, right? That's a success, I would say. And it is actually a true story. I slightly changed it. If you're interested, I can direct you to the talk. So, first, I will tell you how John, you know, what John, Joe, whatever, did very, very well. He, or like, actually, let's not take John, let's take myself. So, if we talk about communications theory, like the very basics, you always have a person, or it can also be an organization, who's the sender of a message. So in this case, this was me sending a message, and I did it in a form of a story, the story of John, to you, the audience. Excuse my beautiful drawing. And then you, the audience, received that message. And I don't have much influence in what you actually heard. The only way I can make sure or try to make that you hear the message that I'm trying to send you is if I know as much as possible about you, which of course is difficult because I've never seen you before. I can more or less think this is kind of maybe how you will react because I know people like you, going to a lot of security conferences, but I don't know. And I know some, and this is important, and I know some of the frames. Frames are ways in which we interpret messages. And by knowing this frame and the framing, so you will receive messages well where there is a CISO who manages to triple their headcount, right? And you will receive messages well where a cybersecurity person does something successfully because you identify with that person. And you also agree, and if you wouldn't be from cybersecurity, you would think like, why should a university spend a lot of money on cybersecurity? That's a waste of money. They're in the business of education. Why do they need to spend, I don't know, hundreds of thousands in technology to secure them, right? That's a waste of money. You don't think like that because you think cybersecurity is important. So I used all of that as a frame, right? And as I said, I used in the little my envelope in getting the message across to you was a story. And I think stories are amazing. Stories are really powerful, and stories, everyone knows a story. Think about what are great stories. The Bible is a great story. Many of the creation myths, like, where do we come from? They are great narratives. Or, Little Red Riding Hood, everyone knows that story. And think about what happens when you tell a story. Every time you tell a story, you adapt it to the person who you're telling it to, right? So when you talk, for example, when you tell the story of Little Red Riding Hood, and it's a child, a 5-year-old child, you probably leave out certain details. Whereas, like, depending on, or let's take another story, you tell it differently depending on, are you talking to your boss? Are you talking to someone in the pub? Are you talking to someone you know very well or someone you don't know very well? And sometimes you even tell a story because you're trying to get a point across, right? Then you're already targeting your communication fairly strongly. Let me just ask you a question. Think about it. Have you ever changed someone's mind in a business context by telling them a compelling story rather than using data? Have you ever tried that? Yeah? Success? Yeah? Okay, why do you think this is? Well, stories are sticky, right? They stick to the mind and they immediately get people's attention rather than saying, okay, let me talk you through this slide of, I don't know, Excel file, huge data. And even if we're people who are more prone to data, it's still much harder. You get people's attention, they convey emotions, and they're very easy to remember, and they're very easy to retell. So you can see where I'm going, right? So stories, they end up in big narratives that we tell ourselves as societies or in domains are really powerful. So I'm going to use a simple story to demonstrate a bit what I mean by using stories to persuade people, to influence people, to basically play with how people receive stories. Are you ready for this experiment?
Yep.
Okay, right. So I have my storybook. It will be difficult with the clicker. And I will start. No, I won't tell you what it's about. It's not from cybersecurity. I've chosen this story specifically because it's a different context completely, so we're all kind of lay people here. And we're affected by it probably in different ways, but I will start. Okay, so let's start with, story. I'm looking at the wrong screen. Let's start with version A of that story. It's 10 p.m. A woman leaves a bar where she spent a great evening celebrating her friend's birthday and starts walking home. A man who had been observing her discreetly all evening leaves shortly after and starts following her. He assaults her. Okay, that's the story. Now, think about it. Who's the perpetrator in this story? And who's the victim? That's pretty clear, right? Yeah? Okay. Now, and who's to blame for the assault? I would say that's pretty easy. What about you?
Sure.
This is already a bit personal. So when I asked you who's to blame for that, for the assault, who's to blame for it, did you ask yourself questions like, and also when I was reading the story, were you asking yourself questions like, why did she walk home alone at night? Did you ask yourself, was she probably drunk? Why didn't she check whether she was followed? And very important, what was she wearing? If you were asking yourself any of those questions, well, they're cultural frames. We've learned to interpret this story in a certain way because we have had this story so many times. And as a woman, side note, there are many things that you should or shouldn't do to protect yourself. Okay, so that was version number 1. And we had 2 protagonists, a woman and a man. Let's move to version B, which is slightly different. We have person A and person B. So wipe your minds completely, right? You haven't heard the first story at all. 10 p.m., person A leaves a bar where they spent a great evening celebrating their friend's birthday, and they start walking home. Person B, who had been observing them discreetly all evening, leaves shortly after and starts following person A. Person A assaults person B. No, sorry, person B assaults person A. Sorry. Okay. Sorry, that's why I've got it written out and I still can't read it. Okay, so in this story, if you wouldn't have had the other version A before, I'm sure you could have probably thought something like, okay, so maybe this was someone, it could have been a guy who followed, a woman or a man, and they punched them in the face because they knew this person had important information in their laptop, and they assaulted them to get the handbag or the rucksack or whatever, right? And I'm pretty sure, well, I'm assuming, I don't know if this is true, that in the first, when I talk of assault in the first version, you were immediately thinking of sexual assault, because it's that framing that we have, right? And what I'm trying to tell you here is I never used the word sexual assault. I didn't even insinuate it. I was just playing with the framing. And if you watch politics, this is done a lot, like really a lot. Okay, let's look at version C, which is horrible, and a way that we hear this story, version 1, quite a lot. We have it's 10 p.m., dressed up provocatively in a miniskirt, a woman leaves a bar by herself to walk home at night. She's probably drunk, after celebrating her friend's birthday, and she doesn't notice a man who's following her. He's a shy guy who had been hoping to talk to her all night, but he didn't make the move. So she doesn't check whether she's been followed, and so the guy walks up to her, starts chatting to her, becomes violent, and she hasn't learned to defend herself. So how does that sound to you? That's much more, in this way, we're already blaming the victim, right? So it's a shy guy, he didn't know, and we're blaming, and again, I'm not talking about what kind of assault, but it's very clear, we're directing the attention of the audience onto all the things that she didn't do to protect herself, all the things that she has done wrong, where in fact, if we look at version A or version B, we all agreed, right? It's very easy. Who's the victim? Who's the perpetrator? And what do we do? By blaming the victim, we're giving a lot of power to the perpetrator, because for the victim then has to be ashamed, right? Because they did something wrong. She should have protected herself more, or if we move to cybersecurity, the organization should have protected itself much more, should have had much higher levels. They didn't do a good job. And if we go on the level of people, we have this narrative, this victim-blaming narrative a lot. Does this look familiar? So, and this is what we're doing when we're calling users the weakest link. Where in fact, they are the target. People are being targeted by criminals, and we should protect them. And in the same way, when we look at the framing that we have in cybersecurity, as I said, beforehand framing. So in framing theory, it kind of suggests that the way an information is presented to audiences influences the choices that people make how to process this information. So cybersecurity is about protection, right? About getting the right level of protection. But I don't have to tell you this, and I trust people who are much more technical than me. Everyone is hackable. Every single organization, every single person. It's just a matter of time. So blaming people for getting hacked is a really bad idea, because it is more or less inevitable, right? So we have to think about what we're doing with this framing. And looking at time, I will leave the more on the framing, and especially the like what you do in ransomware cases when you accept the criminal's frame of saying, oh yeah, we didn't do enough to protect ourselves. You lose that battle. Because you say, well, it's my fault, but it isn't. Of course, there is something like a protection level that you need, but fact is, you got attacked by criminals. They're to blame. So, I will just leave you in the last few minutes with a sort of takeaway on how you can use stories and targeted communication to kind of get your messages across better. Do you remember Joe and what I did at the beginning? Know your audience. Really try to know who you're trying to convince of your messages. Know what moves them. Have a lot of, like, literally, go and have coffee with people, build relationships, and think about what moves them. So if you talk about cybersecurity, that's probably not on the board member's mind that much. If you talk about business risks, that's probably much more their language. So know your audience, speak their language, and by that you remember that picture with my beautiful picture with the message. It doesn't matter if I think like I'm doing a great talk here. That really doesn't matter. In the end, it matters what you think, what you received. And if I didn't get my messages across, it's not that I can blame you for not listening, for not being a bit smarter, for not being whatever. It's basically I haven't done a good job. And this is the basic rule of communication. And the last slide that I want to leave you with is really think about leading the conversation on security in your organization. And what do I mean by that? Security should be a topic. And it shouldn't be a topic where people run away when they see you, right? That's really bad. If this is the case, then you really need to build a lot of trust, build relationships, because you need people. You need people to buy into your story, to support your cause, to say, yes, I understand why security is important. I understand why security is important for me personally in my private life, but also as an organization, why it's important. As I said before, work with stories. Very often when I do stuff with people who are non-technical and I talk about social engineering, I say, does anyone have a great case of a social engineering story? And I don't say social engineering story, but I use online fraud or whatever term, not the technical term. And people will come up with millions of stories. And then you have people's attention, and then you go from there. You don't say like, oh, this is phishing, this is vishing, this is blah, blah, blah. But you say, what's your story? And people will follow. And as I said before, work with questions. I don't know if you've noticed, I've asked you a lot of questions. It's a way of getting people's attention. It's a way of getting people to connect their own experiences to what you're suggesting to them of new kind of pieces of information, and usually it works really well. And with that, I'm nearing the end of the talk. There are just a few marketing slides that I would like to show you. We are doing the escape room Hack the Hacker here. I don't know, it's probably already booked out, but my
3 spots are
there are a few spots. If you want to hear about a different way of approaching security, winning the hearts and minds of people, this is a great way. And I will not talk about our Awareness Day. I will just mention that if you're interested in human factors in security, I'm co-chairing this SIG. If you're a member of FIRST, or even if you're not a member, do join us about everything related to human-centered security. And I think that's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Cornelia. I understand maybe this subject was a bit of controversial. Not many people, for many people, maybe not convenient, and like they didn't feel like this is the way that we usually talk about security, but that's specifically why this topic is here on the stage today. So yeah, I saw there were raise of hands. Please, first from the stage. Can you wait for the microphone so the online speakers can hear that?
Can you?
Yeah.
Works? Yeah. Can you tell some simple story addressed to someone who is a boss, not in business, but in state institution? And always saying, we need to do that and that, but we don't have money for that. Can you give some hint to me?
Tips and tricks.
That's a good one. I mean, it's always about the money, right? Well, there is a really great framework called, I think actually called The Psychology of Influence. Yeah, that's the word. By forgot the first name, Cialdini. And he talks about how you persuade people in a one-to-one situation. So in this situation, when you present a budget, right, always present people with 3 different options. And usually you have the middle kind of, so you have, let's say, a basic, a standard version, and a nice to have. And you don't say, oh, we need all these technologies and then we're safe. Talk about, okay, the protection level, right, which is much more about protecting your government agency or protecting your business. And you say, okay, so if we invest this amount of money, we have this level of protection. And then we still have a risk, right? If you invest this amount of money, I can promise you this protection level. If we invest this amount of money, then we have this protection level. I'm here as the advisor. These are your options. Which one do you want, right? And then usually you go for the middle one. And usually you start, I think, with the most expensive one, and then that part I'm not so sure because I'm not an expert in this specific field. But it's, I mean, there are great frameworks for doing that. And also it helps if you know the person. So the better you know the people in the room who make these decisions, and you know how they, what makes them tick, and the more they trust you, the more you will be able to get through what you want. Yeah.
Thank you. We have 2 questions online.
Okay.
But I'm going to try to combine them in one, because they're pretty similar but absolutely different.
Good luck.
So one basically is, how do you convince the managers and then the same, the IT personnel, that fingerprinting and the weakest link blaming is not the strategy and the way to go forward? So basically, how do you first convince the IT managers and then the CEOs at the same time? Like two target audiences here.
Okay. Well, use the stories that I used. What happens to people when you shame them, when you blame them. It's never great, right? If you want people to change their behavior, as we do in cybersecurity, if we want people to buy into our cause, we want them to be part of our cause. By saying you're doing things wrong, we're alienating them, and we're actually creating a dichotomy between us versus them. There's a great paper, again, by Julie Haney from NIST, I'm a fan, who talks about this, that actually this is a security risk per se if we have this dichotomy of us, the security people, and them, the users. because that means we break trust with users. Users don't trust us. Users need to trust us. Users need to come to us and report. Users need to say, hey, I have a new business process or operations process. I'm not so sure how to make it secure. Can you advise me on how I can make this secure?
And the last question, do you think convincing as a service would be a thing?
Convincing as a service?
Yeah, you would have a lot of IT people like, I need this budget, go solve this. That's a food for thought maybe for you.
Well, I mean, of course, in the end, right, what people, I mean, we can either talk about advocacy, and there's some money in this, or we can talk about people getting their cause forward as lobbying. Big business does this all the time, right, with their interests. And of course, you could think about it, well, you know, this is what we want to do with cybersecurity, and we will put money in creating those stories, in distributing these stories to change the way that people think about cybersecurity, of course.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And here's a little giveaway present where we have cyber socks in it and a little bit of candy. By the way, every one of you can also win a pair of cyber socks. There on the seats, you'll see a QR code where you can fill in the satisfaction survey and give 5 points to Cornelia for a great presentation and had a chance to win the socks as well. So thank you so much.